Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schretter, and today's show is going to be a great one. I'm really looking forward to it. We got a lot of stuff from the NBA to unpack. Also, if you haven't had a chance to check out one of the more recent episodes covering the NBA from our basketball podcast, please check that out as well. You will definitely enjoy the content and definitely enjoy the opinions-based stuff also within it as well. Now today, we got a great show. We got talks about the games that happened last night, the big three games that happened. We're going to talk about the New York Knicks for a little bit, the firing of Lloyd Pierce, and then at the end of my show, I'm going to give the people what they want. Who is the best big in the NBA between Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic? That's going to be really interesting. But to start out my first segment today, I want to talk about the Tuesday recap from the NBA. The Nuggets played the Bucks, the Celtics played the Clippers, and the Lakers played the Phoenix Suns. All those games had very different and interesting results, and they definitely look very exciting going forward. Now let's talk about the Nuggets specifically. They trounced the Milwaukee Bucks. Trounced them. They moved to 20-15 in the year, which still keeps them at the 7th seed right now in the West, but it's a big win for them. They won 128-97. Really just trounced the Milwaukee Bucks, and this is not what people expected, I'm sure. This is definitely not what people thought was going to happen necessarily. But again, when you have a guy like Nikola Jokic who goes for 37 points, 10 rebounds, and 11 assists. As I stated in an earlier show that I did, Nikola Jokic right now is leading the NBA in player efficiency rating, which is all the accumulation of your offensive stats. Basically, the impact you have on your team on the offensive end. He's top 5 in assists as a center. He's top 10 in rebounding and top 10 in points. But it's not just him that was the reason they won that game yesterday. All 5 starters for Denver scored in double figures. Think about that. This has been a crew this year that has struggled with its consistency. Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray. There's been Paul Millsap's been in and out of the lineup. Gary Harris hasn't played. And this is a team that went to the Western Conference Finals last year. A team that everyone expected to be a really great team. But Jamal Murray's been playing great recently. He went from one stretch where he was only averaging 18 points a game. Now he's averaging about 22 points a game. He's starting to look more and more like a legit all-star type player. He's playing incredibly well. And nothing but hats off to his effort and what he's producing on the court. He had 24 points last night. Again, a big game, and he shows up and plays well. And it just shows you again that Milwaukee is not a legit contender. They're just not. Milwaukee's more talented and has the 2-time reigning MVP. He had 27 and 8 last night, but again, they weren't impactful points. A lot of those came in the first half. And Denver just took over. Denver played the best defense I think they played all year. They're right now a below average defensive team in terms of defensive efficiency. And they held Milwaukee, who's a top 5 offense, to 97 points. That's unbelievable. They're doing an incredible job with that defensive performance. And that's going to be something that has to carry over for them to be successful going forward. They also won the rebounding battle, 45-40, against a team in Milwaukee who's much bigger, right? Giannis is 6'11", Brook Lopez is 7'1", Bobby Portis, you bring him off the bench, he's 6'10". Chris Middleton's 6'9", right? Milwaukee's a bigger team than Denver. Hartenstein is about 6'9", right? Jokic is 7 feet tall, I get that. But they beat him on the rebounding battle, and Denver also had 3 less turnovers last night, too. And why are turnovers important? If you win the rebounding battle and you win the turnover battle, you're most likely going to win that game because you're taking care of the ball and you're getting second chance opportunities and preventing second chance opportunities for the other team. That's important because in the NBA, being such a perimeter-dominated game, you need to be able to stop people through different means, through taking care of the basketball, through rebounding at a high level, through being able to defend and adjust your defensive schemes. And Denver did that last night. And this is not a game I expected to be a big blowout. I expected it to be a close game. I actually had Denver winning this game. But still, I expected a better performance from Milwaukee, and they didn't really give it. Now, the second game that I want to highlight a little bit here is the Celtics finding their mark. That's how I described it. They've won 3 straight games. They beat the Los Angeles Clippers 117-112 last night. Kawhi was out with back spasms, so that definitely hurt the Clippers a little bit. But Reggie Jackson had 25 points to help out a little bit there. Paul George had 32 points. But the big thing for the Celtics is, look, Jaylen Brown had 20 points, but Kemba Walker was the big story here. He had 25. And Kemba Walker's been struggling a lot this year because of his knee injury. And he's been able to really make a big difference in the game yesterday. He also had a huge game against Indiana. And when Tatum's been struggling a little bit recently, you got Kemba to at least pick up the slack, and they got a big win, much needed win for them. The big story, though, is just the fourth quarter. The Clippers were outscored by 6 in the fourth quarter, and they are up by a point entering the fourth quarter. So, when it came down to clutch moments, the Clippers, once again, like they did at Milwaukee, didn't come through. Now, you can make excuses for the Clippers and say, Kawhi Leonard wasn't there. Well, that's true, but they also have Paul George, and everyone's claiming that Paul George is this MVP candidate, which he's playing at that for most of the season. So he should be able to beat a team in Boston who everyone is saying is not that good. But he didn't. He didn't come through when they needed him most. He had a great game overall, but his shooting percentage was 12 of 26, which is not a good field goal percentage. And when they needed to win, they didn't come through. Also, the team in the Clippers that's a bigger team, supposedly a tougher team, got out-rebounded by the smaller Celtics by 8 on the glass. Like I said before, you win the rebounding battle, you got a great chance to win the game. Great chance. But for Boston, this is more important for them. Because for Boston's angle, they were able to come through when they had to. Now, why is that important? Because from Boston's perspective, they've been in a little bit of a slump, right? Brad Stevens from the media was getting a lot of heat. Danny Ainge was under a lot of fire. They weren't clicking on the offensive end. They were getting blown out of Atlanta and losing to Detroit and losing to Washington. And everyone was questioning if Boston was even a legit playoff team. At one point, they were 10th in the Eastern Conference. Now, they're the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference because the Eastern Conference is so tight between 4 and 11. So that one night a team loses, they could be pushed down way farther in the standings, and they could have been a much higher seed the day before. It's why each game is so important for these teams in the Eastern Conference to win and to maintain a good level of consistency going forward for a lot of these teams. But Boston's won 3 straight, and they looked really good last night where they were moving the ball really well. Daniel Theis was not trying to do too much. He did what he was supposed to do. And Kemba Walker was nailing those threes off of a lot of those dribble handoffs and ball screens. Because a lot of times, big sag back, they drop. There's a lot of drop coverage in the NBA, which means the big sags back. And as a result of that, Kemba Walker is able to walk into threes, and it's up to him to make it. The big thing, too, is that Jason Tatum came up big down the stretch. He had a big corner three to propel them to this victory. And that's important because for Boston, they got to be able to make it work when they have to, when it counts. Boston has a lot of talent, right? They have Jaylen Brown. They have Jason Tatum. They have Kemba Walker, if he's healthy, very talented. But they don't have a great front court depth in terms of elite level scoring. Even though Daniel Theis is a good player, he's a good role player, plays hard, plays physical, he's 6'8". And Tristan Thompson's never really been an elite offensive player. He's been a rebounder, a role player, a hustle guy. That's kind of what Tristan Thompson's been most of his career. And he was very effective on it with the Cleveland Cavaliers, especially when LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love were there. Because LeBron used him really well to pick and roll. Tristan Thompson's role is a little different this year. He's going to have to use a lot more post moves than he did in the past, which I'm not sure that's really a strength of his game. And Daniel Theis is going to play more from the perimeter, shoot a lot more 15 to 18 footers, threes, orchestrate a lot of things from the pick and roll. And people who question if Brad Stevens can coach, I think last night proved that he can coach. And that the guys do believe in him to an extent. Brad Stevens is one of the best coaches in the NBA. I don't care what anyone says. Because of what he can run schematically wise to get his teams in prime position to get good shots. Now, there might be some questioning about his motivational techniques because he's a pretty laid-back coach. And that makes sense, right? I think part of coaching, you have to be better at motivating your players. But I think the most important aspect of all of this is that he ran the right plays, he got the guys in position, and he gives this team the confidence to go out there and get it done, which is the most important thing if you ask me. If you give players confidence, they're going to succeed. Because all they really need is the confidence, the plays, the certain rotations to make themselves feel comfortable, the certain game shots. And that's what Boston has proven time and time again, is that they can execute. Their problem is they have a lack of size, and Kemba Walker hasn't been entirely consistent all the time. Up until the last 3 games, he was playing at one of the worst levels of his career. And that's partially due to his injury and partially due to him just missing shots. But that's okay because they got a big win last night against the Los Angeles Clippers, who have now dropped 2 straight. And the Clippers, a lot of people still think they're contenders. But they've lost to Brooklyn, and they blame the refs. And that was primarily because Paul George didn't play at the end of the game, and they couldn't get a big stop. They go to Milwaukee. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard in the last 5 minutes of the game go 0 of 9 from the floor. They don't score a point, and Milwaukee comes back, and Giannis gets a dunk to seal the game. And Giannis outplays both of them. Then they go to Boston without Kawhi and lose another pivotal game, I think, for them. Now, they're probably not going to take this as a big issue because they see themselves as a contender, and the Lakers have lost 4 straight games, and the Lakers haven't played very well recently. They're 2-5 in their last 7. So the Clippers are not going to take a 2-game losing streak, I think, too much to heart. But there has to be a level of consistency in the fourth quarter from Kawhi and Paul George, not just the first 3 quarters. Because Paul George, to his credit, has come out and he's played very consistent. But Milwaukee, he did look like the playoff series against Denver and the Mavericks, where he was struggling to get shots when they needed him to make shots in the biggest moments. Now, it could also have been the defensive schemes and the offensive sets that the Clippers were running, right? It's not just all that the player doesn't have it within him like a lot of people think. A lot of times it is offensive sets, and the defense is playing the sets perfectly, force really tough shots, and those aren't going in. But the Clippers are under a microscope because they're the team that was supposed to dethrone the Lakers last year. The team that was in the way for LeBron James. This year, they're very under the radar, and I think they like that. But last night, losing to the Celtics, a team that has been struggling for most of the season, is not a good look, even though you didn't have Kawhi Leonard. You did have enough of your team where you should have won that game if you're a legit title contender. Now, the last game I want to break down, the Lakers unfortunately lose again to the Phoenix Suns. They're 2-5 in their last 7 games, as I just mentioned previously. Phoenix now has taken sole possession of second place in the Western Conference. Who would have thought that? I thought they were going to be a 5th or 6th seed in the playoff picture, but turns out they're not. They're the 2nd seed right now. They have 2 All-Stars in Devin Booker, who's averaging 24 points a game, entering last night, and Chris Paul, who's averaging 15 points, getting a lot of assists, playing great defense. And Phoenix played it unbelievable last night. Really did. They won 114-104, and that was overcoming 38 points from LeBron James last night. LeBron James did all he could do. But Dennis Schroeder didn't shoot a very efficient percentage, even though he had 17 points. And the bench, only one guy from the bench from the Lakers was in double figures. If you're going to win games, you're going to have more consistency. And the Lakers have had this problem with Anthony Davis out of the lineup. LeBron's had to take on more minutes at age 36. He's had to do more. And more times than not, they haven't always worked out in his favor. And this was a big game for Phoenix, more so than the Lakers, because the Lakers aren't in panic mode for losing a couple of games. Last year, in the bubble, they went 3-5 in their 8 games. They looked lethargic, not very good, old. They ended up winning an NBA championship. So the Lakers and LeBron James don't like losing these games, obviously, but are not in panic mode because they've been here before, and they know they don't have Anthony Davis, who is a arguably top 5, top 10 player in this league. And when he comes back, he adds a very different dimension for them on the offensive and defensive end. And the Lakers are still number 1 in defensive efficiency. And LeBron James is number 1 in individual defensive win shares, which basically talks about his individual defensive impact. But enough about the Lakers. Let's talk about the Phoenix Suns and what they did last night. Phoenix comes into this game with a top 6 defense and a top 7 offense in terms of efficiency. That's all Monty Williams and Chris Paul establishing a good culture where they can be balanced on both ends. And in order to win a championship, you have to be balanced on both ends. You also have to have 2 stars. They have both of those. They have Chris Paul and they have Devin Booker. They have defenders in Mikal Bridges. DeAndre Ayton's a very solid player. And look, they shot 55% from 3 last night. The Lakers shot 35.5%. Dario Saric came off the bench and led the entire Suns team in scoring with 21. And they were able to outscore the Lakers by 7 in the fourth quarter without Devin Booker in the lineup to aid and help that out. This is a very impressive win for Phoenix because what Phoenix has done is they have surprised people. They've bought in, they've played together, they've allowed Devin Booker to really operate for where he's comfortable in terms of his spots in the court. And then you got Chris Paul, who, even at 35 years old, Chris Paul is an all-star for a reason because he puts up 15 points, a bunch of assists, plays great defense, and he's one of the best leaders in the NBA. According to reports, that's what everyone says. He's one of the best leaders in the NBA, and he's brought a great culture. Wherever he's been, now that team might not win a championship necessarily, but they've always been a playoff team and very successful in that own right. Last year with a OKC team that's now rebuilding, that team got to be a 5th seed in the West and took the Houston Rockets to 7 games and had a chance to win it in the closing minutes. Chris Paul has definitely been a major reason why Phoenix has turned it around, but Monty Williams is also a major reason because of what kind of systems he's running on the offensive end, getting Devin Booker a lot of plays in the mid-post area. Because Devin Booker, like a Kobe Bryant, like a Kawhi Leonard, loves operating from the mid-post area because he's very efficient down there. He has a lot of moves he can go to. And Devin Booker is a certified great scorer. So the thing is that allows him to be successful. Chris Paul runs a great pick and roll with DeAndre Ayton, allowing DeAndre Ayton to flourish. Dario Saric is a guy off the bench who can pick and pop threes. He can attack the basket a little bit. A big body, but very mobile. Mikal Bridges is a guy who can get 18, 20 points if needed. He can also get 10 points, but he's a guy that's going to guard your best player. And he's long, he's athletic. He does a really good job on that end of the floor. He did a good job at Villanova, and he's transferred over those athletic tools and skills to a place like Phoenix where he's really become very successful. Now for Phoenix, being the second in the Western Conference is huge because they have leverage now, right? They're above the Lakers and above the Clippers. And no one expected them to be there. A lot of people counted them out, didn't think they were good enough. But what they have done has taken their talent, their schemes, allowed it to work properly, and Monty Williams has really built a culture that has allowed this team to flourish. Chris Paul has brought leadership to a younger player like Devin Booker, which has allowed him to understand what winning basketball is. They've carried over that 8-0 bubble record last year where they almost made the playoffs and allowed themselves to become the second best team right now in the Western Conference. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but when I come back, we're going to talk about the New York Knicks, and later on the show, I'm going to talk about who is the best NBA big man between Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid. See you guys in a little bit.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schretter, and on the last segment, I broke down the NBA games from Tuesday, specifically the Nuggets beating the Bucks, the Celtics outlasting the Clippers, and the Lakers losing the second seed in their loss to the Phoenix Suns. Check out later in my show when I break down who the best big man in the NBA is between Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid. But on this segment, I'm going to break down a team that hits close to me, being a local New Jersey guy, the New York Knicks, and their emergence this year. The New York Knicks have been a really big surprise for me this season. And the reason being is specifically they've been able to actually build a brand that is worth watching. From Charles Oakley storming out of the stadium to Phil Jackson running the team not as efficiently as he would have wanted, the New York Knicks were a laughingstock for the past 15 years at least in the NBA because they hadn't built a product that people were worth watching or wanted to actually go watch, because they're the mecca of basketball. Madison Square Garden's the mecca of basketball in terms of arenas, in terms of the allure of going to Madison Square Garden. But the Knicks have turned it around this year. They're 18-18 this year, currently stand at 5th in the East. And that's not saying a whole ton because the East is definitely a little weaker than it has been in terms of 4 through 10 being so close. But I'm going to break down a little bit about how they've been so successful, what has helped them get to this level, and why the Knicks actually should be taken seriously. Let's just start off with the big thing for them. They are number 1 in the NBA in points allowed. They allow the fewest amount of points in the NBA this season. How about that? A team that couldn't play defense a year ago, a team that had no guys that seemed to be defensive stoppers. With Coach Thibodeau coming in this past summer, they were able to build now the team that's number 1 in terms of scoring defense. Let's also look at the fact that they're 3rd in rebounding. 3rd in rebounding. And like I broke down in the last segment, that's incredibly important. Because if you win the rebounding battle, most nights, you're going to have a great chance to win. And that's because you get more second chance opportunities. That's because you also get an opportunity to keep the team from getting second chance opportunities and at least building your team to a level that you feel good about in staying in close games. Because if you want to stay in close games, you got to be able to rebound. And the Knicks have been proving that all season that they can rebound at a high level. But the big thing that jumps out at me is the fact that they are the 4th best defense in the NBA according to their defensive efficiency. Now, that probably is lower than it was going into last night because they did not play great defense against San Antonio last night, allowed 119 points in their 119-93 loss. But the Knicks have proven most of the year that they can defend at a high level and that their team is exciting. They have an emerging all-star in Julius Randle, first-time all-star this year. Julius Randle's been a guy who's always had major talent, but a lot of people have questioned whether or not he actually could put it together. And he's proven everyone, I think, wrong this year in terms of just what he's been able to do. He went from being a guy who was major turnover prone to a guy who was called selfish on the court, called immature in terms of his game. No one questioned his personality. People just questioned, can he actually get over his turnover demons and the ability of him to actually be able to use his offhand, not just drive left, and be able to actually hit perimeter shots. Well, he's proven everyone wrong there. He's shooting 42% from 3. He's averaging 23 points a game, 11 rebounds, and 6 assists, which he leads the team in every category. Think about that. Your power forward, a guy who's 6'8", 250, leads your team in every statistical category. That's why they're successful, because they give him the ball in the mid to low post area, and he can make quick decisions. He can make a move, and he gets doubled, he kicks it out to guys. Now, the Knicks are one of the worst teams in the NBA in terms of offensive numbers. But that's also because they're a young team with not a whole lot of star talent outside of Julius Randle, or just not a consistent enough star-level talent. But on another good news, Immanuel Quickley, their rookie, has been, in my opinion, the steal of the draft. People might say Tyrese Haliburton, but a lot of people thought Tyrese Haliburton was already going to be good. But Immanuel Quickley has done what I think few people thought he wouldn't be able to do. He's been super successful in the NBA. Now, he needs to shoot a better percentage. He shoots below 40% from the floor. but he's averaging 12.2 points a game off the bench. He's had multiple games where he scored 20 to 25. And he's a guy that's tough, that you can play at the end of the games, that can shoot, get to the rim, create for others. And he's embraced Tom Thibodeau. Same thing like Julius Randle. They've all embraced what Thibodeau has wanted them to do. And for teams to be successful, you got to embrace what your coach wants you to do. And you look at players like Elfrid Payton having a career year this year. Julius Randle having a career year this year. Nerlens Noel being fourth in block shots in the NBA at 2 a game. Right? The Knicks have been a shocker. And they also just got Derrick Rose about a couple weeks ago in a trade. They picked him up, got rid of Dennis Smith Jr., who was not playing a whole ton for them anyway. And Derrick Rose, since he's been here, has been averaging 12.5 points a game. Now, Derrick Rose is not the Derrick Rose of Chicago. Those injuries have definitely caught up to him. But he's a good bench player / when he has to start. When Elfrid Payton's been out recently, he's done a fairly good job. And for the Knicks to be successful, he's going to have to continue to be that scoring punch off the bench with Emmanuel Quickley. And so far, they've been pretty good in that regard. Now, their field goal percentages can definitely be better, but they've been at least a consistent 12 to 15 points off the bench for you. Let's also look at the teams they've beaten this year for people to have some context, right? Because in order to judge if a team's actually legit, you have to look at who they've beaten this year. Well, they've beaten Milwaukee, who's 3rd in the East. They beat Boston, who's 4th in the East. They beat Indiana. Indiana's a good team. Right now, they're 9th in the East. They beat Golden State, who's the 8th seed in the West. Utah, who has the best record in the NBA. And they beat Portland, who's the 5th seed in the West. Those are very quality wins for their squad. And it's because they've been relatively competitive, because they can trust their defense. They also move the ball a lot. They don't just do a lot of just throw the ball to one guy, let him go ISO, and he just shoots it every time. Because Julius Randle is a good passer now, and he knows how to make smart decisions for the team to win games. Because Thibodeau knows how to get it done, because he coached in Chicago a team with a lot of ragtag tough guys to be able to get them to the high level, right? He built a lot of tough guys who were underestimated in the NBA. And that's how they were able to get to that point in Chicago, where they became a number 1 seed in 2011 and met the Big Three of Miami in the Eastern Conference Finals. Derrick Rose was an MVP then. The youngest MVP to ever be in the NBA. So let's look at Derrick Rose, right? And he's been a good pickup. But Thibodeau is the big reason why this team has changed their course. Also, you have to look at Worldwide Wes. You got to look at Leon Rose, Scott Perry, guys like that who have really instilled a good culture, right? They've gotten the right guys in place. Thibodeau's brought the right system for the squad. And that's so important. And that's allowed them to really get to a high level where they feel comfortable getting to that next step. But RJ Barrett has also been a really quiet surprise this year for this team as well. RJ Barrett has emerged as a good player this year. He's had multiple games where he's scored 25. He's even had games where he's scored close to 30. Right, he's been more consistent this year. And the big problem that a lot of people saw with RJ Barrett was whether or not he could have been consistent. Can he get the job done? Is what people were asking. Well, I think from my vantage point, he could totally get it done. He just has consistency issues in terms of being able to shoot the ball at a high percentage. But RJ Barrett has definitely emerged himself as a definite high-level player. Think about it. When he came out of Duke, he was the 3rd pick of the draft on that really hyped-up Duke team with Cam Reddish, Zion Williamson, Trey Jones. Team that fell short in the NCAA tournament, losing the Elite Eight. A game in which he did not play very well. He gets picked 3rd overall into the media capital of the world, so he's already going to be under a lot of scrutiny because the Knicks are the talk of New York. The national media talks about Brooklyn more, but New York talks about the Knicks more. It's the Knicks town, as they refer to it. And RJ Barrett has definitely proven a lot more. He's proven that he will play defense at a high level. He's proven that he can score when needed to. And he's proven that he's not just a great college player that can't transfer over to the NBA like a lot of guys have had happen back in at least like the 1980s or even just in modern age. Tyler Hansbrough is a good example, right? Guy who's doing unbelievable in China right now. Same thing with Jimmer Fredette, but guys who couldn't quite make it in the NBA. And that's not a knock on them. The NBA is a tough business. People don't realize that just because you're a high-level draft pick doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be great in the NBA. You got to be able to fit what the coach needs. You got to be able to fit the type of game the NBA is. Just because you come from a great program, a great tradition, does not mean that you're going to come in and dominate right away. It takes time. You got to figure out your skill set. You got to buy into the coach. You're going to have to figure out how to attack certain defensive schemes that are going on. Because in the NBA, people are going to take away your best move. Good defenders know you. Defenders are watching film religiously. And that makes things very difficult for a top-notch player to figure it out. But RJ Barrett, to his credit, even though there has been some inconsistencies for sure, has really proven to be able to pick up the slack a little bit and emerge as a good player alongside Julius Randle. Now you also got guys like Nerlens Noel, like I said, Energy Bunny, right? He's fourth in the NBA in block shots, as I mentioned before. You also got Mitchell Robinson, who's injured, Taj Gibson, who's injured, who provided great minutes when they were healthy. But I think the most important thing to take away from all of this is the fact that the Knicks are actually a quality team. Right? Being 500 does not necessarily mean that you're a good team, but they're quality. They're fifth in the Eastern Conference. I didn't expect that. I don't think many people expected that. Because the Knicks have been the laughingstock of the NBA the last couple years. Well, not just the last couple of years. You can say the last decade, maybe the last 20 years. Ever since Latrell Sprewell and Allen Houston were there, they have been terrible. They only had 2 good years in their playoffs, 2012 and 2013. 2013, they ended up being the 2 seed and couldn't quite beat Indiana that year. But, to their credit, though, Mike Woodson was a very good hire. And he's back on the staff again this year with Thibodeau. So they have a lot of defensive minds and defensive players on their team. Because the way they're going to win games is not by outscoring you. Julius Randle is a good offensive player this year. But their offensive numbers are near the bottom of the league. The reason they're winning games is because their defensive numbers are near the top of the league. And defense is very important. You look at championship level teams the last couple of years, they've been able to play defense. The Warriors, the Lakers, the Cavs in 2016 were able to buckle down defensively when they had to. Miami, San Antonio, right? Those teams played defense. They had defensive schemes. Yes, they had great offensive players as well, but they were able to defend at a high level. And in order to win games, you got to be able to defend at a high level. It's crucial to be able to defend at a high level. Now, there is a lot of skepticism of the Knicks because, frankly, a lot of people think that the East just isn't very good and that the Knicks also play the second easiest schedule in the league and that they're going to go downhill from here. They're not going to finish over 500. Well, that makes a lot of sense. People would look at that and say, if you play the second easiest schedule and you finish 500, you play against harder teams, you're not going to play as well. But the Knicks do have a formula that can work against successful teams. They play defense at a high level. They share the ball. They play hard every night. They buy into what Coach Thibodeau wants them to do. They have a legit star in Julius Randle. They have guys off the bench in Rose and Quickly who can provide a scoring punch. And they have tough bigs. Nerlens Noel and Obi Toppin, even though he's not been doing a whole lot offensively, provides great energy off the bench. And you got players like Elfrid Payton when he's healthy, and Alec Burks, who's been playing great. These guys have had the confidence under Thibodeau to really make their games shine. And against good teams, if you play good defense, you're going to be in a lot of the games. And the Knicks have proven that they can do that. They can get themselves to that level. But the skepticism also continues in the sense that if they play Boston or Miami in the first round, a lot of people don't see them winning those series. And that is a great question. Can the Knicks win a first-round series? My answer would probably be, it would be hard depending on their opponent. I would like us more against Milwaukee than I would Boston, because we've had more success against Milwaukee, I would say, in terms of what similar style we could put against them. We beat Boston by 30, right? The Knicks beat them by 30. But Boston, if they're all clicking on all cylinders, has a great perimeter attack, is a hard team to wall off against. Milwaukee you can wall off against because that's worked the last couple of years when they've lost playoff series. And the Knicks have perimeter defenders that can do that. But it's not that simple. The Knicks also are a young team. And they're also a team that is right now just figuring out how to be successful, how to be a playoff team. So that's difficult. If you're not going to be able to live to being a playoff team, it's going to be hard for you to win. Everyone acknowledges that they are moving in the right direction. But the thing is, they're saying if they make the playoffs, can they actually win a playoff series? I'm not looking to jump to conclusions right now. I'm looking to make sure this team is successful. They continue to be successful as they go through a tougher stretch of games after the All-Star break. But Knicks fans should be proud of the product they put on the court. And by who I'm referring to, Thibodeau, Leon Rose, James Dolan, the owner, Worldwide West, have all contributed to putting this product together. And it's been a product that really resembles New York. People who are tough, they work hard, right? They don't take no for an answer. And you look at the Knicks, and that's really been what has happened. They've proven people wrong. Julius Randle, best year of his career, right? Number 1 in points allowed. Number 4 in overall defense, like I stated before. Who would have thought the Knicks could have been able to do this? The Knicks definitely have a long way to go, but I think what they have proven is that they are talented enough to win games on the defensive end, and they have a star. If he has it going, which he has had most games this year, they have a good chance because they have enough role players who play hard and know their role that they can at least make the playoffs and potentially win a first-round series, even though I think it would be very difficult for them to do so. When we come back after this commercial break, I will be breaking down the firing of Lloyd Pierce from the Atlanta Hawks. He just got fired on Monday. And I also will be talking about later in the show, like I said before, who's better between Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid? That's a pretty interesting topic. All those great segments coming back after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schretter, and on the last segment, we talked about the New York Knicks. So I'm a Jersey guy, and I'm a Knicks fan, and I want to talk about how the Knicks have been able to be somewhat successful this season, how they've been able to at least build a brand, and talked about how their defense has been exceptional this year, how their coaching has been really good, how the guys have bought in, and Julius Randle has become an all-star. So the Knicks actually have been surprising a lot of people and has been very interesting. But I want to break down the firing of Lloyd Pierce from the Atlanta Hawks. Now, this was a surprise to a lot of NBA coaches because they felt that he was a good leader of men because he did a lot of off-the-court work in Georgia. That was really exceptional for a political realm-wise, and also the fact that he's a good person and that he can coach a good offense. The Hawks were 10th in offensive efficiency this year up until his firing. But his record as a coach was 63-120, and he was 14-20 this season, which was 11th in the East, and this team had a lot of expectations. They went out and got Danilo Gallinari, Bogdanovich from the Kings. They also got Clint Capella. Guys like that who have brought leadership. And also, let's not forget Rajon Rondo as well. Now, there have been a lot of injuries to those guys. Bogdanovich has been out 26 games, and Gallinari was out 10 games. Rondo's been out some games as well. So they've had some injuries. Right, they've been in a tough spot. They were in a rebuilding mode the first 2 years, so not all of that record can be his fault. It probably isn't, but it's the nature of the NBA business. If you don't have a good record, they got to find someone who they think is going to do a better job. And what happened for Pierce was that, according to reports, especially Brian Windhorst reported this, he said that he basically lost the command of the locker room. The guys weren't resonating with his voice as much. Now, is that his fault entirely? Not always, because sometimes coaches are young, they're trying to figure it out, and some players just want to do their own thing. But that's not a good look for the front office's point of view, because they want to have a coach who's going to command respect. Even though Lloyd Pierce does command respect based on what he's done off the court and the kind of family man he's described to be, on the court, he can coach a good offense, but their defensive efficiency was really poor. They were 24th in defensive efficiency, and the month of February, they were 27th in defensive efficiency, which resulted in a .267 winning percentage. Now, for people who don't really understand winning percentages, 500 means that you have the same amount of wins and losses. So think about what .267 is. That means you win about 27% of your games, which, again, is not good. Especially as they got off to a good start. People thought this team was going to be a playoff team. And look, they're still in contention. But the problem with their team was their defense. And the fact that Lloyd Pierce's voice was not resonating with the team. Even though he coached a team that was 10th in offensive efficiency based on a fact of they could shoot the three. They ran great pick and roll sets with Clint Capella and Trae Young. DeAndre Hunter was playing better offensively. So was guys like Cam Reddish. They felt it was time for a change. GM Travis Schlenk explained how he thought the change would allow the Hawks to have a strong second half of the season. And people are going to ask, well, who's taking over for this guy now? Who's their head coaching possibilities? Well, the interim head coach right now is a very successful head coach before he got fired in Indiana, Nate McMillan. Nate McMillan is a very solid head coach in the NBA. He's a guy who has a 661 and 588 record in 16 seasons. He made the playoffs 9 out of those 16 seasons. He made the playoffs in Seattle, Portland, Indiana. Everywhere he went, they at least made the playoffs when he was there. And it's interesting for sure because the styles they run are very different. Nate McMillan is a big-time defensive coach. Grind you out, right? Use the clock. Run good offense. Play exceptional defense. That's what Nate McMillan's about. And if you look at his track record, he had the 6th best defense in the 2019 to 2020 season with the Indiana Pacers. And they actually had their best statistical season and also their best seeding season under him that year. Their problem was they couldn't get past the first round. That was the reason they let him go, because they were tired of not getting past the first round. And Nate McMillan kept on getting them to the playoffs, but they couldn't get by the first round because they didn't have enough offense. Even though they had Domantas Sabonis, who was an all-star under him. Victor Oladipo was a very solid player under him. He was an all-star also with him. They couldn't muster enough points in order to have the amount of talent to beat teams. Now, in the bubble, they didn't have Sabonis in the lineup. And Sabonis, for people who haven't watched him play, is a really exceptional center. He's an all-star again this year. So, Nate McMillan knows what he's doing, and it's a good substitute for Lloyd Pierce. Now, people are going to probably think, oh, well, if you have that kind of record, you don't deserve a head coaching job again. No, Lloyd Pierce deserves another shot. When you have a 10th best offensive team in the league, that's exceptional. People are going to look at that and say, that guy knows what he's doing in terms of offensive sets. He's also a young coach. He's a guy that people respect in the league. Popovich described him as a knowledgeable guy and a people's person. He compared the problem of firing a coach to a good player being evaluated wrongly, in the sense that people did overlook the fact that Pierce was handling a complete rebuild, and that's why his record was so poor. Then again, like I said, it is the nature of the business of the NBA. The GMs and owners are going to try and find coaches that are more successful to fit their team, and they're going to look at analytics. Again, analytics are a huge part of the NBA today. Huge part of the NBA today. And in order for teams to win, they look at analytics. Now, a lot of old school guys say, oh, we just went out there and played. We didn't care about analytics. But a lot of times that helps scouting. It helps what kind of offense you should run. It talks about who should get the ball more. Right? It's going to talk about your strengths and weaknesses. Analytics have actually helped out the NBA in a lot of retrospects. And let's also talk about the fact how another coach really respected Lloyd Pierce, and Rick Carlisle, head coach of the Dallas Mavericks, a guy who was an NBA champion like Greg Popovich for the San Antonio Spurs, knows definitely the game of basketball and definitely understands coaching. He said that Lloyd Pierce is one of the bright young coaches in the league, and he deserves another opportunity. And that his work in Georgia should not be overlooked, and that this is a great man who definitely deserves another shot. Again, Pierce deserves another shot. Just because you get fired and it doesn't work at one place doesn't mean that you can't be successful somewhere else. Take Tom Thibodeau as an example. He was not super successful in Minnesota. Only made the playoffs 1 year. And now he's with the Knicks, has them 5th seed in the East. He was really successful in Chicago. So I'm sure Lloyd Pierce will find another job somewhere else. He's a brilliant offensive mind, so he'll definitely get another chance. But Trae Young, for example, his points are a little down from last year, but his stats are very similar or better than last year. And people think that he got snubbed from the All-Star game, and rightfully so. He's having a great year. But the big thing with this team, right, is they've given up a lot of leads late in games. And now, why has that been? Well, it's been because they don't play defense at a high level. It's because they score a lot of points, but can't stop anyone else. While Clint Capella's a great rebounder and a good shot blocker, the guards on their team, besides DeAndre Hunter, are not exceptional defenders. Or they just didn't buy into the scheme that Pierce put in. Because they played Miami last night and held Miami to 80 points, which is a season low for the Atlanta Hawks. So Nate McMillan coaches one game and his team finally starts playing defense. Seems a little odd to me. It probably comes back to the fact that they actually trusted his voice more. And Pierce is a young coach, and that's some part of the business, is that you're going to have to take the troubles of not having a success at certain places you go. And Atlanta was a team, again, with high expectations because they have Trae Young, they have Clint Capella, John Collins, who's an 18-point-a-game scorer, DeAndre Hunter, who's a very good player, Cam Reddish, who's an emerging talent, Bogdanovich, who was a big-time scorer in Sacramento, Gallinari, who's a great veteran player for you, guy who averaged 19 points last year for OKC. So people looked at this team and said, this team can win the East. But being 11th in the East is not what the front office in Atlanta expected. And whether it's fair or not, they felt it was time for a coaching change. And Nate McMillan, in his first game, really had them play defense. So that kind of makes a lot of sense from my mind, is that you get Nate McMillan in there, a guy who's known to be a great defensive coach, and they win games by grinding them out, right? They don't have the same flair offensively as I watched them play, but defensively they locked in a lot more. Because Miami can score, right? They have three-point shooters. Bam Adebayo's a 20-point-a-game scorer, a guy who's an all-star snub, right? It's not like Miami is this horrible team offensively. They're not necessarily a juggernaut like the Brooklyn Nets, but they're a good offensive team. They can score the ball. Tyler Hero can score. Jimmy Butler can score. Now, they're similar to those Indiana teams that McMillan coaches, is that they will grind you out, run a lot of clock off, run a lot of dribble handoffs, which is another way to kind of get defenses to move. It's like very similar to a ball screen, right, for people who don't understand that terminology. But again, it's about implementing a culture that these young players can be held accountable. And also, again, it's about defense, right? I've said this on other segments in the show so far about the importance of being able to play defense. If you don't play defense, you're not going to win many games because you're not going to be able to just outscore teams. Now, you're Brooklyn. You may be able to do that because Brooklyn has three of the best ISO scorers in the league in Kyrie, James Harden, and Kevin Durant. But that's an anomaly. You have to be able to play defense to win games. That's why Minnesota hasn't been very successful the last 10 years, it feels like. But especially the last 5 years. Making the playoffs in 2018 as an A seed, that was because of Jimmy Butler. But they were never a good defensive team because they don't buy into defense. Atlanta was a very similar team in that way. They could score a lot of points, but didn't play defense. Again, when you're 24th out of 30 teams in terms of defensive efficiency, you don't play great defense. You don't. Now they're better than teams like New Orleans and Sacramento defensively, and Brooklyn. But you shouldn't hang your hat on being the 6th worst defense in the league. Especially when you have guys like DeAndre Hunter who went to Virginia, which Virginia's known to be a great team in terms of defense. Clint Capella, who was known to be a good shot blocker in Houston. And supposedly guys who wanted to win games this year. Now, I know the NBA has an easier time scoring offense. A lot more threes are being put up, right? A lot more emphasis of putting the ball in guards' hands who can create and score for others. It's about allowing these guys the freedom to get guys open. I get that. But the reason why the Lakers won a World Championship last year and the reason why Miami got to the NBA Finals is because of defense. So, last night was a great step in the right direction for them. And what's interesting about that, too, is that Atlanta did it in a way that they normally don't, right? They grinded them out and wore them out to their defense. And that's simply because of Nate McMillan. Nate McMillan knows how to win games because he has a 570 winning percentage. And he's won with teams in Portland, right? He's won with teams in Indiana. He's won with teams in Seattle. And Lloyd Pierce will hopefully get a job somewhere else, but he's got to learn from this opportunity that defense is just as important as offense and that you have to get guys to buy into that. That's the ultimate important thing there. And that's ultimately what comes down to for the Atlanta Hawks. Are they going to be able to keep this trend going? Are these young players going to buy into playing defense? Well, my answer would be, I don't know. Because Brooklyn's had games this year where they've played fantastic defense. And then they have had games where they allowed 149 points to the Washington Wizards, who aren't even a playoff team at this moment. They're not even in the play-in game contention. Right? The play-in game, 10 teams from each conference have a shot at the playoffs. Then you have a play-in tournament between the 8, 9, and 10 seed to try and see who gets in the playoffs. Similar to how the bubble was constructed. But the bubble was just the 8th and 9th seed play each other. Gives more teams an opportunity. I think it was because of the shortened season. But still, think about it, right? Can they get into a play-in game? Sure. If they're solid defensively. But we don't know that. The history tells us differently. But Nate McMillan also tells us that he can coach defense. Even when he lost a series against LeBron James back in 2018, when LeBron had a historic series against them, their defense was, for the most part, very good. It's just LeBron James is LeBron James. Like I said earlier, he had 38 points last night. He's 36 years old. So it's going to be hard to stop certain guys. But if they can show some level of consistency on the defensive end, they're going to be able to be more successful. And it's sad to see any coach get fired, especially guys who know the game and have done great work in the community and really care about their players. But the problem is, right, it comes down to success and how the players accept your voice. Popovich has been in San Antonio forever because people accept his voice. People accept his message because he's proven it. But when you're 63 and 120 as a head coach, whether or not that's entirely always your fault because he was a rebuild and there were injuries, the front office is going to look for a change because the fans want to change. Because the fans want to see a product that's worth contending. Right? David Fizdale as an example, right? Is the entire way of the Knicks losing his fault? No. The Knicks weren't talented that year at all. But Thibodeau comes in after a disastrous year last year with Fizdale and Mike Miller, integrates his culture and his way to make the Knicks more successful. Now, we all know that coaching is not the only reason why a team does bad. Sometimes players are hard to control. Sometimes the team's too young. And Atlanta's a young team. They're one of the youngest teams in the league. Lloyd Pierce is a young coach. But that doesn't mean that he can't be successful somewhere else. It just meant that he was not going to be super successful here. But people felt it was a little abrupt to fire him before the All-Star break But again, it's the nature of the NBA business. You got to win, and unfortunately, whether it's fair or not, you got to find out a way to win and build the talent along with that. And Trae Young was playing very well under him, but people just felt his voice didn't resonate anymore, and he wasn't quite getting the guys to buy into his way, and they felt that Nate McMillan would be a better choice there. And sometimes that stuff happens. You just got to figure it out, and I wish Lloyd Pierce nothing but the best. I wish Nate McMillan nothing but the best with his job now at the Atlanta Hawks. I think Nate McMillan will do a great job at Atlanta. I think they'll be a good defensive team. I think they'll have a shot of making the playoffs. And I think Lloyd Pierce will get another chance somewhere because he's a bright young mind and a good offensive coach. I think teams can use that. And I think he'll learn from this experience how best to handle situations in the future. But I'm excited to see how things go, definitely as things transpire. We're going to take a quick commercial break here. On my last segment, we're going to talk about who the best big in the NBA is. Is it Nikola Jokic or is it Joel Embiid? Both guys are playing at MVP level. All that great analysis will come back after the break.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Schretter, and on this segment, I'm going to be breaking down who the best big in the NBA is. It's going to be a really interesting segment. I'm very excited for this one. But before I get into that, I want to talk about what happened on my last segment, which was the firing of Lloyd Pierce from the Atlanta Hawks. Now, people are going to look at that and say, that was a shame. And it was. But I'm excited to see where his future holds, and I'm also excited to see what Nate McMillan can do with the Atlanta Hawks, because they have a lot of talent that hasn't been unlocked yet, in my opinion. But on this wild card segment, I'm going to talk about who the best big in the NBA is between Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic. Now, both guys have been playing at an MVP level. Nikola Jokic is playing absurdly well, probably the best in his career. Same thing with Joel Embiid. But I'm going to talk about the strengths of both bigs, and a little bit of their weaknesses, and then determine who I think is the better big. Now, Joel Embiid, his strengths is that he's a 29.8 point per game scorer this year. That's second in the NBA. He's eighth in rebounding. The Philly has the best record in the Eastern Conference. He's second in player efficiency rating. So for people who have not heard me explain this before, player efficiency rating is the accumulation of your offensive stats. It basically determines all that into one number and explains your offensive impact. So for a lot of people who don't necessarily understand how impactful a guy is on the offensive end, this is the perfect number to explain that to people who don't quite get that portion of it. Now, let's talk also the fact that he's a great defender. He's averaging 1.3 blocks and 1.2 steals. That's incredible for a center. He has a career high in assists, 3.3 assists. And when he hasn't been in the lineup, the Sixers are 2-4 this year without him. And they started out 0-4. Now they won a few games when he wasn't there, but he's made a humongous impact to that offense. They are virtually unbeatable when he's there, and they lose games when he's not because of just the attention and impact he brings every night. He's also just a very skilled player. He can shoot the three, shooting at 42% from three this year. He can hit the mid-range jump shot with ease. He can face you up, back you down the post. He's got an array of moves he can go to. His favorite moves are definitely the fadeaway, the face-up jump shot, a right-hand hook. He's got everything. He's just a very skilled offensive player. And this year, the difference is he's playing more in the post under Doc Rivers because Doc Rivers is motivating him to do so, as opposed to previous years when he would play on the perimeter and didn't want to go in the post or didn't want to listen to what Brett Brown told him. And he's really proven that he really is such a dominant force. And now he's putting Philly in that NBA Finals contender conversation. They're number one in the Eastern Conference. They have a great defense. They have a good offense. And that's all a credit to him and what he's been able to do. Their offense efficiency numbers are actually really good because when they get it inside to him, he's very efficient around the basket. And that's all a credit to what he's been able to do night in, night out. And he's been very consistent, normally getting around that 25 to 30 mark. He's had some 50-point games this year. He's had some games, obviously, where he hasn't played very well. The 2 games up in Toronto, he didn't play very well. But his impact, even when he doesn't play well, has still allowed them to win games because he drags so much attention with him. And that allows the offense to really feed off of him. And he is a much better passer this year, so that allows the team to become more successful. However, he does have weaknesses, and it's his fact that he's not an elite level passer. He's a good passer, but not an elite level passer. His turnover to assist ratio is barely over a positive amount. It means he has only 0.1 more assists than turnovers. So that is a knock against him, is the fact that he's not an elite level passer. I think he could totally be that, but I don't think he has been right now this year. And the fact that in his playoff career, he hasn't really had a ton of success. You can look at Toronto beating him in 2019, Boston beating them easily in 2018. You can also look at the fact of losing the first round to Boston last year. Also look at the fact that sometimes he becomes a little perimeter happy, shoots a lot of jump shots, not always going to enforce his will, but this year he's been much better with that. That has been his weaknesses in the past, but this year under Doc Rivers, he's gotten way more motivated. He's in the best shape of his career, so that's allowed him to become really successful. That's kind of where I break it down for him. And he's having an MVP type season. He's in the MVP conversation, and this is the first time in his career I really think he's played to his potential, because I think he's one of the most gifted scorers we have in the NBA from a big perspective. And I think he's just one of the most gifted players generally in the NBA. But it's always been a mindset with him and whether or not he has that it factor that's going to allow him to win games. Let's also look at the fact that his team's number one in the East, right? That's huge. That really gets a big case for you because of his impact. That's why they're number one in the Eastern Conference. Now let's look at his opponent that we're taking in this debate, Nikola Jokic. Nikola Jokic is a guy who has a very unorthodox game, doesn't live on athleticism. Like Embiid is by far the better athlete out of the two. He's a guy who was criticized for being out of shape last year, but then went to the playoffs, dominated the Clippers, played great against the Lakers, really well in the last couple games against the Jazz, even though Jamal Murray really took over that series. And he's a guy that just beats you from every facet. But this year, he's taken the really next step in his development. He's an MVP candidate as well this year. His team right now is 7th in the West. They got a big win, as I stated in the earlier segment, against the Milwaukee Bucks, where he had 37, 10, and 11. And that's not only what he does. He does that against Chicago. He does that against Utah. He's been putting up numbers like that all year. He's first in player efficiency rating this year, which means that he's having the greatest impact on the offensive end for his team out of anyone in the league. Let's also look at the fact that he's averaging 27 points per game. That's top 10 in the league. 11 rebounds, top 10 in the league. 8.5 assists, top 5 in the league. And that's a center we're talking about. A 7-foot, 270-pound center doing all that. He plays point center for the Nuggets. And that's allowed them to really take off and become very successful. And that's what has allowed him to become the player that he needs to be and can be. That's where I kind of break it down for him. Now let's also take a look at the fact that he's shown dominance against the Clippers in previous playoffs, right? And he's shown dominance against certain teams this year like Utah and Chicago, Milwaukee, Boston, Dallas. Like, those teams are legit teams. And he's shown dominance. Portland's another team he's shown a great dominance against, right? At Sacramento, he had 50 points. I mean, the guy's unbelievable because he can shoot the three at a high percentage. He's a good mid-range shooter, great passer. He's elite in the post. Him and Embiid are probably the two best post centers. And his game is marginally different than Embiid. He definitely spends more time in the perimeter. He plays more finesse because he can't jump as high, or he's not nearly as strong and agile as Embiid. But the thing that's impressed me about him is that he is averaging 1.6 steals a game. Because he gets his hand in passing lanes. He has great awareness. He's got great hands. And you can also take a look at the fact that their offense right now is top 5 in the NBA in offensive efficiency. That's not because of Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. that's happening. Now, Jamal Murray's been playing great the last couple games, ever since he had a rough start. But the big thing with him, though, and I think people forget to mention this, is that Jokic creates a lot of those opportunities for him because Jokic is their point guard. They actually inbound the ball to him sometimes. Not just sometimes, actually. A lot of the time. And he runs the offense. He runs a lot of these dribble handoffs. But he throws these backdoor passes. Throws plays out of the post for players to get open threes. And that's because he's a very cerebral player. He understands the game really well. He understands his strengths and weaknesses. And the fact that he's also playing this point center role is because he's in the best shape of his career. And he can hit the three at a very high level. He can take bigs off the dribble because he's got a nice handle. He's strong, so he can take you in the post, and he's very efficient down there. And then you also got the fact that he's a smart player, and he understands where his team's supposed to be. He understands Mike Malone's offense very well. He understands how he can make plays for others. He also understands his physical limitations. And that's allowed him to become very successful in terms of building a good offense and building an MVP case. Now, the issue with him, though, is he's not a very good defender, and neither is Denver as a team. They're average defensively. He's not very athletic, so a lot of bigs who are quicker than him can beat him off the dribble. And he has a tendency in the past to be turnover prone. This year, he's been much better at that. And that's something he's definitely fixed, but that is a problem of his. And the last thing is, sometimes his aggression level is not always there. Like Embiid, they have a tendency to not always impose their will. This year, that's been the complete opposite of the whole stereotype with these guys. But that is something that he's had in the past. So determining who's better between these two is very difficult because if you're talking about the last couple years, I would take Nikola Jokic because he's had playoff success. He's actually impacted his team more in winning. They were the second seed and third seed, coincidentally, the last couple years in the Western Conference playoffs. And that's all a credit to him and what he can do. The last couple years, especially in the playoffs, he's really taken his game to the next level. Let's look at the Spurs series, the Portland series from 2019. Then let's look at the bubble last year. right? If you're taking the last couple of years, I would take Nikola Jokic in a heartbeat because he's impacted winning more. But this year, it's not as easy as that because Embiid is playing at an MVP level. I would say this season, Embiid's been slightly better. And people are going to sit there and say, but Embiid's got a more talented team. I would disagree. Now, Ben Simmons is probably better than Michael Porter Jr. at the third option. But I'm not saying Tobias Harris is necessarily better than Jamal Murray at the second option. Denver's got a lot of offense. It's because Embiid is putting up very similar numbers statistically, except for assists, and he's a much better defender. So the thing is, if he's playing at this level, you're going to get a great defensive effort as well from him. And I think as Doc Rivers has motivated him, Embiid has been better. His team's doing better than Jokic's team is doing. He's been a little more dominant, I would say, on both ends of the court. And the team is winning more, right? It's also about who's winning more, right? The statistics, I would even say, favor Embiid, mostly because he's averaging more points, same amount of rebounds and less assists, but his defense is better, right? He's averaging 1.3 blocks and 1.2 steals. Jokic doesn't even average a block a game. So, if you're asking me who's going to make the greater impact on that end, it's Embiid. And that's why Embiid, in my opinion, has been better this year. And I would say he's the better big at the moment. But it's very, very close. It's a toss-up. Because what it really comes down to is who proves themselves in the playoffs. Like, I would trust Jokic more in the playoffs based on his playoff success. But if Embiid's playing at this level, especially in the East, no one's stopping him from doing what he wants to do. It's always been a mental thing with Embiid. If Embiid's able to be in shape, impose his will on the low block, it's over for guys. They can't guard him down there. He's too athletic. He's too smart. He's too skilled. There's nothing you can do. And that's kind of where I go with that, because if you're basing on this season, the team that has a better record, the guy who has slightly better statistics, the guy who plays better defense, all those go to Embiid. Now, Jokic is playing at an unbelievable level, and he should be in the MVP conversation. But if you're telling me which guy's better out of the two of here, I have to go with Embiid this season. Overall, Jokic is the better big, but this season, Embiid's better. 100%. And if you give me a team based on current guys right now, I would take Embiid over Jokic because Embiid has been healthy this year for the most part. He plays better defense. Now, if you're saying long-term, who would I take? I would take Jokic because I know his health is going to be there. I know he's going to show up ready to play, and I've seen playoff success from him. But right now in the regular season, Embiid has been better. That's how I take it. The second part of this, though, is who do I trust more in the playoffs? Like I said, I would trust Jokic more because Jokic has proven it more in the playoffs, and his team's had more success in the playoffs when he's been there. But this is a different version of Joel Embiid than past years. This is not the out-of-shape, lazy Joel Embiid that's been criticized by the media as those things. I'm not necessarily saying that he's that, but that's what people have said. This is the Joel Embiid who's imposing his will, getting on the low block, then going out and shooting threes, and making everything a nightmare for every big he faces this year. And if you watch the way he's playing, that's what's been going on for him this season. But no discredit to what Jokic has been able to do this year. Jokic has proven time and time again how unstoppable of an offensive force he is as well. I just would take Embiid because of his defense. Embiid plays much better defense. Much better defense. And I think this year that Philly's going to be in the Eastern Conference Finals, have a chance to go to the NBA championship. I don't think Denver's going to be in the Western Conference Finals this year because they don't defend well enough and the others aren't good enough on that team. I love Jokic. I also like Embiid, but objectively, you got to look at which team's doing better, which guy's a better defender, and whose guys' statistics are slightly better too, right? They're both first and second in total PER, and Embiid is the better defender. So if you look at all that, again, that's why you have to give the edge to Embiid. But I think an interesting question that comes up with this is, who do you take for the next 5 years? Do you take Joel Embiid or do you take Jokic? Because they're both really young guys. Jokic is only 25, Embiid's only 26. And a lot of people would give the easy answer. And the easy answer there would be, well, I'm taking Joel Embiid because he's better statistically. Well, that's not as easy as that, right? I'm saying this season he's better. But if you ask me who I would take for the last couple years entering this year, Nikola Jokic. Who I'm taking 5 years from now, I'm taking Nikola Jokic. Because Nikola Jokic is more dependable in terms of his health. Right? It's why there's been trade rumors and circulation around Kristaps Porzingis, because he's not dependable with his health. You can't trust the guy for even a year, let alone 5 years. But Jokic, you can trust him for 5 years. You can sit there and say, oh, Jokic, I'm going to get him for 5 years. He's only going to get better. Our team is going to be able to flourish offensively with him there. And we're going to be in the playoffs every year he's there. Joel Embiid's had injury issues. While I think he's a better big out of the two of them based on this year, his health's been an issue. And that's one reason why in the future, I would trust having Jokic in the lineup over Embiid. But if you're asking me, again, who's better this season? It's Joel Embiid. I think Joel Embiid is second to LeBron in the MVP race. And I really think that he has a great shot of winning the MVP, even more so than Jokic does. And I love Nikola Jokic, but Embiid is slightly better. But in the future, I think people would probably take Jokic because his health is more dependable. But again, it's a very tough argument because Jokic does make his teammates slightly better. Embiid plays slightly better defense. It's a very difficult argument. But this season, I would take Joel Embiid because he's just been a little bit more dominant. Now that concludes the show. I encourage you guys to follow us on social media. Facebook, Twitter, GSMC Basketball Podcast. We post a lot of content there, and it'll be a good way for you guys to interact with us. So again, this is the end of the show. This is the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I'm Michael Schretter, and thank you for tuning in.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.